In recent times, terms like far-right and ultra-right have been used to brand anyone opposing abortion, same-sex marriage, or the exclusion of religious views from public life with the stigma of Nazism or fascism. Widely held opinions, grounded in the universal practices of civilized nations, are suddenly being pushed into the dark, labeled as abnormal, unacceptable, and even forbidden. The enlightened elite sets itself up as the standard of what's normal and right, much like Dr. Bacamarte in Machado de Asis's The Alienist, condemning the entire populace as mad, fanatical, and extremist. This monstrous semantic distortion, pure symbolic violence, appears with remarkable consistency in both leftist discourse and the mainstream media, which hypocritically pretends to be an enemy and a helpless victim of a left that dominates the leadership positions in nearly every newsroom in the country. The immediate goal of this operation is to plunge the Christian population into a spiral of silence, stripping them of the verbal tools necessary for self-defense, and consequently weakening their identity to the point of completely dissolving it. It is, without question, a blatant cultural genocide, criminal to the highest degree, that sets the stage for the official adoption of militant anti-Christianity as a mandatory national policy, realizing Lenin's dream of sweeping Christianity off the face of the earth. The idea that a policy inspired by Christian teachings could have any affinity with Nazism or fascism is indefensible from any angle. It's plainly absurd when you consider that the defeat of Nazism and fascism was precisely what brought explicitly Christian parties to power for the first time in European history, such as the Christian democracy in Germany and Italy. Mutatis mutandis, it was Catholic and Protestant conservatives who, across Europe, championed resistance to Hitler, while communists and leftists generally preferred to accommodate the Nazi regime, then favorable to Moscow's interests, which shared Poland's corpse with the Nazis. Communist leadership shamelessly exploits the historical ignorance of its followers by making them believe that so-called far-right opinions are actually those mainstream views that brought peace, stability, and democratic normalcy to the world after the nightmare of World War II. Meanwhile, in areas occupied by communism, the repressive institutions created by the Nazis were simply modernized and adapted to suit the needs of a more cunning and efficient dictatorship. Today, it is well established, beyond any reasonable doubt, that Nazism could never have grown into a global threat without the clandestine support of the Soviets, camouflaged by a facade of anti-Nazism. When communists try to associate their conservative opponents with the memory of Nazism and fascism, they are merely following the standard procedure set since Lenin's time. Commit the crime, quickly cover up the evidence, and cast the blame on the first scapegoat available before anyone can suspect the true culprit. There has never been, nor will there ever be, a well-meaning communist, for the simple reason that communism fundamentally rejects all moral principles, replacing them with a new ethic in which nothing is held above the interests of the revolution, and no moral duty is greater than increasing the party's power by any means necessary. Every communist, without exception, is a scoundrel and a manipulator, ready to ascend to the status of a murderer or genocidal maniac the moment they are called to do so by the revolutionary clergy. No one has ever become a communist out of love for the poor, humanitarian idealism, or any other noble motive. Everyone who joins does so driven by the desire to ennoble themselves and sanctify the practice of evil, transfigured into a party virtue. Communism does not exploit the highest sentiments, but the lowest of all, the desire to invert the moral sense so that each person feels holier the more they wallow in lies and crime. A timely new example of this inversion comes from Mr. Tarso Genro, who blames paid far-right groups for the vandalism in several Brazilian cities. This grotesque parody of an intellectual and writer knows perfectly well that the violent acts occurred mainly in the early days when practically only leftist radicals were in the streets. These, in fact, paid by Mr. George Soros in the São Paulo Forum, long before any Christian, conservative, or patriot had the chance to spoil, as the leftists said, the carefully planned unrest meant to push forward a communist revolutionary upgrade. It's the good old, accuse them of what you do, call them what you are, which communists have rigorously followed for a century. As always, this inversion sets the stage for their favorite activity: persecuting the innocent, sending them to jail, killing them, and then blaming them afterward. People who engage in such behavior don't deserve any honest citizen's attention, and that's why I'm not speaking to them. I'm addressing what remains of moral conscience among business people, judges, prosecutors, lawyers, politicians, and military officers. And what I have to say to them is simple and direct. Audit the São Paulo Forum now. Let's see who the real paid agitators are.